Hey, I'm Jordan. I am one of the trainer guides here for Appalachian Yukon. Last year, Utah changed the way they do their CDL pre-trip, and it's caused a little bit of confusion on route, what's required. It's just a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and go through that. There's a few important distinctions is they'll give you a sheet of paper that you can look over and go down the list. You go down a checklist of the items. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the way you should do a pre-trip. It's just the way that it's checked off on that checklist. When they simplified the amount of items that they talked about, what they wanted us to do is understand the why we check these items and what's going on. There's less of the memorization and more so of the knowledge base of it. So every time we go over something with the checklist, we wanted to say the why and what to inspect on all of those. So we're going to go through that today. Start with the air brake test, which I did on an earlier date. So obviously it looks like a different day. I'm wearing different clothes, all that stuff. And then we're going to go down the checklist from air brake down. So we'll go ahead and do that now. All right, we're going to go over the air brake test specifically designed for the Utah CDL test and what is required by it. We test the air brakes to make sure that the air brakes function the way they should, that there's no malfunction within the air brake system, and that's what this test is designed to do. We're going to start with the first of the tests, which is the governor cut-in, cut-out test, mainly the governor cut-out test, in which we're going to have to start the motor coach, pump the brakes down to where the governor will cut in, just under 100 psi. It'll supply the air, we'll watch the air build up, and then on this particular coach, it'll cut out at 125 psi. It should be between 120 and 140. This particular coach is 125. So let's go ahead and do that now. Starting the coach, releasing the parking brake, pumping down till it's under 100, setting the parking brake. We're going to turn the fast idle on so that it builds up air faster. We're going to watch the air build up, and at 120, 125 is when this motor coach's governor cutoff will happen. You'll hear the psh sound from the motor coach, and you'll know that it is cut out and we have a full tank of air. The whole reason we're doing the governor cutout at this moment in time is to ensure that we have a full tank of air. That is the reason that it has been placed there. It's been added into the book specifically for this, this is ensuring that we have a full tank of air to complete the rest of the air brake test. That sound there means that the governor cut out. We have a full tank of air so we can complete the rest of the test. In order to do so, we're going to turn the fast idle back off, letting the coach get back to normal. In order to do the next test, we're going to have to turn off the master switch or turn off the engine to the motor coach so that the air compressor is not supplying air to our brakes while we test to see if we have air leakage. So we're going to turn off the motor coach. The air compressor is no longer supplying air to our brake system. Turn the master switch back on. This allows our gauges to work and any warning devices so we know that everything functions. And we're going to do what is called the air leakage rate test. We're going to release the parking brake, do a full compression of the brake, and then we're going to time it for 1 minute, and we can't lose more than 3 psi in that 1 minute of time for it to pass the test. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Again, motor coach is off, master switch is on, parking brake released, full compression. We're going to watch the air gauge and make sure it doesn't lose more than 3 psi in 1 minute of time, or 60 seconds. On this one, you wait until the air is stabilized, because once you press down on the brake, it is going to lose a little bit of psi. But from that moment, once it's stabilized, that initial loss, that's when the 3 psi starts. This one always hurts your leg. All right. It has passed that test. Going on to the next one, which is the low air warning device test. We're going to be pumping down the air brakes, fanning down, full compressions, and the low air warning device, either the buzzer and or light, should turn on before 55 psi. This particular motor coach has a light and buzzer, so we're going to go ahead and do that now. Fanning down, doing full compressions. Okay, it came on at 70 psi, which passes the test because it is before 55 psi. The next test is the emergency brake or pop-up test, which we're going to fan down the brakes again, and the emergency brake should pop up between 20 and 45 psi. However, this motor coach has a DD3 system, which is a backup brake system, and it does not perform this test. It is the way that the brakes are designed. So I'm going to demonstrate what it would be like, but this motor coach specifically with the braking system is not designed to do this. I'll go ahead and do that now. Pump down. Assuming it worked, we're at 45 psi, between 20 and 45 psi. Our brake here would set, our parking brake, and that would have passed the test. But since this says the DD3, it would not do that, so I just mimicked the test. Now that we have set the parking brake, we're going to go ahead and, since it's passed that test, the next step is the air buildup test, which while we're building up air, we're going to make sure it builds up at a correct time frame. So we'll start it, it'll build up air, and it has to get between 85 and 145 seconds. So we're going to go ahead and start it. Again, parking brake set, coach is in neutral. Start it, turn the fast idle on now that the pressure is built up. And we're going to watch it and make sure that it doesn't go, it makes the test from 85 to 100 in 45 seconds. So we're looking for that now. Okay, it's at 85, so I'm timing it now, and it should get to 100 before the 45 seconds is up. This particular test is an add-on that we do as a company. It is not considered part of the air brake test for the Utah CDL, but it is something that we practice as a company. Okay, took about 35 seconds. We're able to get there, and it's just going to build up the rest of the way. Yep, right there, turned the low air warning off, and it'll build up, and the governor will cut out, and we've completed the air brake test for the state of Utah. The test right after the air brake test is the parking brake test. Just because I'm by myself here and no one filming me, I can't really perform these tests, but I'm going to explain what you would do. During your test, you would have to do these tests, how I say they are performed. The first one is the parking brake test. The parking brake test, now that you're over 100 psi in the air gauge, you can move the motor coach. What you would do is you would shift the motor coach into drive, making sure that the parking brake is set, and then after you had shifted it and set the parking brake, you would hit the accelerator just a little bit to make sure that it stays. After the parking brake test, the next test is the service brake test. So you're going to make sure your chocks, like you should have done for the last one, your chocks are gone at this point. They're no longer holding you. You're going to put it into gear, release the parking brake, move forward, going between 3 to 5 miles per hour, 5 miles per hour. You're going to firmly, not violently, firmly press the brake down enough. And there's two things that should happen. It should stop the vehicle, and you shouldn't feel the wheel or the motor coach jerk to the left or the right of the vehicle. That could imply a slack adjuster issue. So it will stop the motor coach, and it won't veer left or right. Our lighting indicator test. We're going to go ahead, every time we're in the seat, we just buckle up, good habit to be in. Now there's a few lights that we need to check for, and basically this light check is for the indicators on our dashboard that they are functioning correctly. That's the point of this particular test. So the reason we want to know these is because we want to know if our turn signals are on or running or not running. So if we can identify those, it also help us if our high beams are on. Maybe our high beams are on and we're blinding other drivers. We need to know these things. And so we're going to check to make sure they work on the dash. So we'll go ahead and do that. Now the first one you check for is the ABS light. You would start the vehicle. You would look for the ABS light to come on, and then go through its checks and turn off. This particular motor coach does not have an ABS light, but if it did, I would check for that functionality. The next one you would check for is your high beams. So you go ahead and check, turn our lights on. High beam light, it turns on. Next one is our hazards, to make sure both of those turn on our dash. And then also our left and right turn signal. So left turn signal functions. Right turn signal also functions. If you had a DEF light, you would check for the DEF light. And if you had a DPF light, you would check for that as well. This coach has neither one of those, as it is not a DEF run coach. So we would just check the ones that I mentioned. The next part on the test is the emergency equipment part of the test, in which we're going to check for 3 emergency equipment items that should be in the in-cab of your vehicle. Most of the times in semis, that's how they are. That's why it's called the in-cab inspection. For simplicity, I've added those items into our cabs to make it easier. So the first of those is our emergency triangles, which I'm keeping here in this top bin. We would check to make sure that there are actually 3 triangles inside of that bin. Next, we have our spare fuses. We would have spare fuses for the motor coach there. Now, it's important to note, if you're in a motor coach that does not have fuses, it runs off a circuit breaker, you need to show where that circuit breaker is on the motor coach in order to pass that part, because that's one of the qualifications for not having spare fuses. And the third one is our fire extinguisher. The fire extinguisher is under the second seat over here. We're going to be checking to make sure that it is within date. So it's been checked within the last year, that it is charged. The yellow is in the green, and it is charged fully and is properly mounted to the vehicle. We check for those 3 things specifically. Forget. The why we check these items is because if there's an emergency, we need to know where they are and that we can use them, especially the triangles and the fire extinguisher. If there were an emergency, we need to know where both of those are located, and more importantly, that we do have them. The next part of it would be the windshield and traffic monitoring devices. Traffic monitoring devices is an odd word for mostly mirrors, but we'll get to that in a second. First one, for our windshield, we would check the overall clarity of the windshield to make sure that it actually can be seen out of. There's no chips or cracks present in the windshield, and especially if anything in the driver's view. That is, we check for the windshield, and then also it's properly sealed as well. The traffic monitoring devices, in our case, is just mirrors. The reason they have it as traffic monitoring devices is because some vehicles are equipped with cameras on the side too to help monitor traffic. If it is equipped with cameras, you need to make sure that those cameras function correctly. If not, you're just going to be checking the mirrors. In this case, we'll just check this here mirror and show you what it would be. We check to make sure it's properly mounted and secure to the vehicle. There's no cracks or breaks, especially on the glass that would be looking through, that we can see it from the driver's seat, and that they would be set to our specifications so we could easily monitor traffic. So we check that for both passenger side mirror and driver's side mirror. I'd like to mention for the traffic monitoring devices and windshield, you would check them from the seat. I was just showing it to show the mirror, but you would check the windshield, just like I mentioned before, and the mirrors from the driver's seat. The next one on this is the windshield wipers and washer fluid. We would check each individual wiper to make sure that they function, and the windshield washer wiper fluid as well. We're also going to check to make sure that the windshield wipers are properly mounted to the vehicle, that they have a good blade on them, and that there is proper tension against the windshield. We do this to make sure that the windshield can be clear, have clarity, in case there's ever a storm or get mud or something on the windshield, we can be able to wipe it away. So that's why we check those, and we're going to physically, like I did, check to make sure that they function like they should. Also, we're going to check to make sure our heat and defrost work. So we turn the heat on. Yep, I can hear it back there. Heat works. And our defroster functions. We check both of those to make sure we have heat for our cabin, for our guests. And then if it is cold and we have foggy windows or icy windows, the defrost could help melt away that and keep our windshield clear. So we want to make sure that both of those function as they should. We're going to check to make sure that our horn functions the way that it should. Both of them in this case, the electric horn and our air horn, to make sure that they function. We do this, we want to make sure that our horn works in case we need to alert traffic to our whereabouts, or if there's an issue that we see that maybe they don't, we can alert traffic that way. So that's why we check to make sure our horns function. So we just finished the in-cab engine start section of the pre-trip. Now we're moving on to the passenger section of the pre-trip. Any school bus or passenger endorsement has to go through this section of the CDL pre-trip. So the first one on there is the passenger entryway and or lift. Now in our case, we do not have a lift on this motor coach, so we will not need to check it. If you do have a lift, you need to check to make sure that there's nothing leaking and that it functions correctly. You go through all the little systems and make sure that it worked the way that it should. For the entryway to the motor coach, what we're going to check for first here is that the door opens and closes as it should and has a good seal around, a good seal so that the door will seal correctly. It opens and closes correctly, maybe a little hard, but correctly. And there's a proper seal. Also, the hinge cover is here to help protect our guests in case they were to rub up against us. The hinge cover is there as well. Now that we've checked the door, we're going to go ahead and check to make sure that the entryway is clear. So we're going to go ahead and open the door again. First things here we're going to check are all of our handles to make sure that they are properly mounted and secure to the vehicle and not loose. We're going to check the floor for any debris, any type of debris. It could be liquids that could cause slippery or anything that could be an obstruction to our guests. We want to make sure it's clear of all of those items. And then we're also, since this bus is equipped with a step light, we're going to go ahead and function to make sure that turns on too. We'll turn the step light on. It indeed works. So that has passed that test. The next section we would check is the emergency exits of the vehicle. We're going to check to make sure that they're properly placarded, that the placard is easily visible and clear. It tells you exactly how to use the exit window. You would check for functionality and make sure that the window is operable. Same goes for the roof hatches up above. You check for placards and that they function. The reason we check for the emergency exits to work is because if there were an emergency, we want to make sure that they're operable and that the guests would be able to use them. The next section we would check would be the passenger seating section. We're going to check to make sure that the passenger seats, the cushions, are properly mounted to the seat frame and that the seat frame itself is mounted to the vehicle. So you would check for both of those for this section, and you would hypothetically do it for every single seat. If this coach was equipped with seat belts for the passengers, you would have to also inspect the seat belts for each passenger seat. The reason we check for passenger seating, to be clear, because we don't want any type of issue where the chair itself is not securely fastened to the vehicle, which could potentially cause injury to our guests. The last one for this section would be checking the passenger monitoring devices. Again, that's one of those ambiguous terms because there's different things that could mean monitoring devices. It could be cameras. A lot of school buses are equipped with cameras. This particular vehicle is not equipped with cameras. So we're just going to check to make sure the passenger mirror up here is set so we can see the passengers, properly mounted to the vehicle, and free obstructions, no cracks or breaks in the glass there. The reason we check to make sure that the passenger monitoring devices are set is so that we can monitor our passengers and potentially see any risks or hazards that could be along the way, and we could alert the passengers to them. So we would be able to monitor them through that mirror. The next test that we are going to perform is the lights operation check. We checked to make sure that they could work on our indicators already, so the next one is going to be that they actually function the way that they should. There are 7 lights that we're going to have to check. We're going to have to check our high beams, our headlights, our clearance lights, our tail lights, our brake lights, hazards, left and right turn signals. 8, technically. So we're going to go through all of those, and with the help of the tester, we're going to be able to perform those. We'll have him go outside, and with our direction, we'll tell him what we're going to be looking. He'll be outside in the front. We'll tell him, all right, we're looking at our left turn signal at the front and on the side of the motor coach. So we'll check to make sure the left turn signal works there along the side. We're going to check to make sure our right turn signal works in the front and on the sides. We're going to make sure our headlights turn on. Once he tells us that these have all functioned, we'll do the next one. Make sure our high beams turn on. And we'll do our 4-ways. Now going off into the back, we're going to move him to the back of the motor coach. This is all under our direction. We're telling him what to do. He's not telling us what to do. So we're going to go ahead and check the tail lights function, which in this case is when we do our brake check, is when the tail lights come on, because currently the parking brake lights are our our brake lights. So we're going to make sure that our brake lights function. The only way to do that is by putting it into gear or releasing the parking brake and doing a full compression. So we'll do that now. And you have to take your foot off the brake. A lot of people leave their foot on the brake just a little bit to hold it. You actually have to take your foot off the brake for this. All the way off. Stop. All the way off. Stop. Got it. Set the parking brake again. And then we're going to have to do right turn signal, left turn signal, and 4-ways for the back as well. And every time we're checking all clearance lights along the top to make sure that they function as well. So we're going to go have them check, make sure they operate the way they should for all of those. This next section of the test is the front end of the vehicle and engine. Most of the time, semis and a lot of school buses have the engine in the front. So on us, we just have to check what it says on the front first, and then the engine back in the back. So on the front, first thing it says is lenses. That's a fancy way of any of the light fixtures on the motor coach. Now in the front, we would check for this. We already checked to make sure that the lights are operable. So here we're making sure that they're correct color and that they're properly mounted to the vehicle. So in this case, make sure our headlights and high beams here are properly mounted to the vehicle, that our hazards are properly mounted to the vehicle, not cracked, not broken, free of obstructions, and then they would be amber here in the front for any of the hazards, and then also for the clearance lights up top. And anything in the back would be red. So we're going to check for all of those for all of the lenses up here. Now that we're back here at the engine, we're going to go ahead and open this up, and the first check is fluids. So what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that 3 specific fluids are properly, we have those fluids inside the motor coach. So the reason we check this is we want to make sure that the fluids are in there because they help us with the power steering, they help us with their lubrication of the engine, and then cooling down our engine as well. Anytime you're working back in the back of the engine, you're going to turn off your engine switches. And the 3 that we are checking for on here is our power steering fluid, that it is inside the sight glass. Our oil, we're going to check the oil, pull it out, put it back in, check it out. It's going to be between the low and the full. And it's not going to have any type of contaminants in it, such as antifreeze. You could maybe smell diesel, anything like that. And then the last of the fluids that we would check is the coolant up there in the coolant reservoir. We're going to make sure that it is inside of the sight glass. Those are the 3 fluid levels that we will check. Next, we're going to check for any fluid or air leaks. So fluid leaks, we're going to be checking all of the hoses and clamps to make sure that they're properly mounted to the vehicle and there's no leaking from any of those, any gear-driven parts along the engine. So water pump, air compressor, power steering pump, we check all of those areas looking for any type of leaks, and then also, obviously, underneath the vehicle as well to make sure there are no leaks under the vehicle either. Air leaks, you would listen at the air compressor, listening for air leaks to make sure that there is no air leaking from the system. You check all that because we need those fluids properly running in there and air for the brakes. So we want to make sure that all of those are not leaking from the vehicle. The next portion of the engine part of the pre-trip is the steering systems. Steering systems up here on our front bay. You'll need a screwdriver of some kind to get in there. On the steering systems, we're going to check all of the rods and arms on there. They're not bent, broken, no leaks, properly greased, appear to be working condition, connected to each other. Any nuts, bolts, or pins of any kind are going to be present and secure. So we're going to check for all of those in the steering system and the steering box. The steering box will be properly mounted to the vehicle, and also there will be all the hoses properly mounted to the steering box and not leaking either. So we'll check for all of that in the steering system up here in the front bay. The reason we check the steering systems is because it steers the motor coach. And we want to make sure they're properly connected because we don't want to lose steering, and that we also have the power steering arriving to the steering box to allow us to have the proper lubrication to be able to steer as well. So that's the why for why we're checking all of these items. So the next section after the engine and front end of vehicle check, it is the steering axle check. Now this one we need a few tools I have with us, especially for this first part of the test. Now what we're going to first check out on this is the tires. We need to check the tires because it's the one thing that connects us to the ground. We want to make sure that um, that they will be able to hold us, that they will hold inflation for the time that we're out there. And we need to check it because it can be very dangerous, especially if the steering axle tire goes. So we're going to go ahead and check a few things on that. I'm going to start with the tread depth. We've got a tread depth gauge here. It's the only way to really check the depth of a tread. And this one is 17/32 of an inch. The lowest that they can be on a front steer tire is 4/32, whereas in the back it can be 2/32. On the front here, we're looking at 4/32 at the minimum. This one has 17/32. We're looking for even tread, so we're going to make sure that we cover the ABCs of the tire: abrasions, bulges, and cuts. Abrasions on the tread, where there's might be flat spots, could be a possible indication of something wrong with the coach, and also that it wouldn't be able to run properly. We'll make sure there's no bulges along the sidewall of the tire, and then there's no cuts that go into the metal or to the plies of the tire. So we're going to check all three of those things on the tire, and then we're going to check for proper inflation. The only way to check for proper inflation is with a tire pressure gauge. So you would go in there to the valve stem, which you're going to make sure is properly connected to the tire and is not leaking in there, and then it is also visible. Yep, it is good. So make sure that the tire has proper inflation, and also, since it's a front tire, it cannot be retreaded, whereas the back tires can. I haven't mentioned that. Now that we've checked the tire for condition, we're going to go on to the next part, which is the rims. The rims can have no welds on them, so any welds would be considered an illegal weld. We're going to look for rust streaks coming off the lug nuts. That could imply that there are loose lug nuts on there, or loose wheel wedges is sometimes what they call them. And then also no elongated holes along the studs. So out of round is what we'd call that, from probably loose lug nuts. And that there's no cracks or breaks. A lot of times cracks appear near these lug nuts when people have over tightened them. So we're going to look any cracks along the whole thing, but that might be a place to really look for them, especially if there's a lot of rust on there. And then also make sure it has a firm seal of the tire properly mounted to the vehicle. The next one is the lug nuts. On the lug nuts, we're going to make sure that the studs are present, they're not cracked or broken, that the lug nuts are properly fastened on there. At least they should be around 500 psi, but we'll check them just to make sure that they are not loose in any way. Check all the lug nuts, and none of them are missing as well. And then we're going to look for shiny metal along the studs, which could imply loose lug nuts. So we'd want to make sure that those hold the tire onto the motor coach, and so we want to make sure that all of those components are working together to keep this tire on the motor coach, and there won't be any issues. Now that we've inspected the rims, lug nuts, and tires, we're going to go ahead and go on to the suspension components of the vehicle. It says specifically as the parts leaf spring, spring mounts, airbags, and shock absorbers. This has airbags and shock absorbers. So what we're going to look for on the shock absorbers: mounted top and bottom, firmly secured to the vehicle, not bent, not broken, also not leaking since there are hydraulic fluids inside of those. With the air bellow mounted top and bottom, properly inflated since it has air in there, no cracks, no breaks, anything that could imply that it could lose inflation. Some vehicles, it is very difficult to see this, especially on the newer motor coaches. So you would at least mention that because I can't see them, those are what I would inspect. And also, it is good to mention that the coach should be level. So if we're looking for levelness of the coach, shouldn't be leaning to one side or the other. That could imply there could be a suspension issue. The next section is the brake lines. So we make sure that the air lines are connected to the air chamber there. The air lines are not leaking. they're properly connected to the air chamber. There's no cuts or frays, anything that could imply that the airline could lose air. So we'd be listening for the air leaks, and we'd be looking at the physical airline to make sure that it is properly connected to the vehicle. The next thing is brake contaminants, specifically around the brake pads and drums or lines and discs, depending on the braking system of the vehicle. You'll check to make sure there's no brake contaminants on those. A lot of times that'd be oil or something similar that could get in there and could prohibit you from being able to stop the vehicle. So that's why I want to inspect to make sure that none of those items are there, anything that could prohibit the vehicle from stopping. Next section is the side of the vehicle. Things we're going to check first are the lenses and reflectors. On the lenses, we're going to make sure that they're properly mounted to the vehicle. They are the correct color. We're going to check all marker lights, turn signals, and clearance lights. Proper color on the side of the vehicle will be yellow or amber up until the tag tires, and then the back end of the vehicle will be red. So we're going to check all the lights and reflectors as well. And making sure there's no cracks or breaks on these as well. The next section is the traffic monitoring devices. Again, if you had cameras, you check to make sure the cameras are clear here, but we just have the mirrors on this vehicle. So check to make sure that they're both properly mounted to the vehicle. There's no cracks or breaks along the glass of the mirrors, and they can be viewed from the inside of the vehicle. All right, the next section is the battery portion of the side of the vehicle. The battery themselves have to be properly mounted to the vehicle. All of the connectors are properly connected to the vehicle and its terminals. There's no corrosion on the battery, and all the caps, all 12 caps, are on the vehicle as well, and it's also not leaking. Those are the things we'd look for on the battery compartment, which is right here in this bay right here. The next section is fuel tanks and DEF tanks. This does not have DEF, so there's no DEF tanks on here, but there is fuel tanks. We're going to check to make sure that the fuel cap is properly mounted to the vehicle and it's shut properly. The fuel tank itself is not leaking. You're not hearing any drips, and again, properly mounted to the vehicle. So we check that. Even if you can't see the fuel tank very well, you're still supposed to check it. So you would check for that there as well, or any type of leaking, anything that could imply there'd be leaking. You don't want diesel leaking on the freeway. That can cause huge issues. So that's why I want to make sure that that is working properly. That also goes for our DEF tanks as well, if they are equipped. The frame of this vehicle is a unibody frame. You can see some of the engine cradle in the back, but you're going to check to make sure the frame doesn't have any holes in it, has no structural damage, illegal welds, anything that can imply that the frame of the vehicle has been damaged in any way and it is not operable. So we're going to check for all of those just to make sure that they're structurally sound. All right, the last section of the pre-trip is the rear of the vehicle. In the rear of the vehicle, we're checking for lenses and reflectors. Just like we checked on the sides and the front, we're going to make sure they're properly mounted to the vehicle. No cracks, breaks, obstructions, anything that could prohibit the clarity of what we're seeing. We're going to make sure the reflectors are there, proper color, red in the back. Same with the lights, red in the back, yellow on the sides, minus the turn signals. And we're going to check to make sure the clearance lights meet that criteria as well. Again, in a previous one, we checked to make sure that the vehicle operated. So we're going to make sure that the brake lights, tail lights, all that stuff are the proper color back there. We would have checked for operation in a previous thing. That's all we need to check here on the back for the CDL State pre-trip.